Welcome to Earth, a Love Story. I'm your host, Robin Lassiter. Before we get started with today's conversation, a couple of housekeeping items. Our community gatherings for clients, members of my cohorts, and patrons have been going really great. It's been really fun to meet with everyone. So if you want to get in on those, the next group is happening on Friday, February 7th at 2 p.m. Mountain Standard Time. We talk about phenomenal experiences, current anomalous culture, and how all of this moves through our physical and emotional bodies woven together by the nervous system. This is an intimate space with community guidelines that support mature reflections and relationality. And if you'd like to get in on it, you can become a patron by visiting patreon.com/Robin Lassiter and joining the $10 Earth Lovers tier. And you'll get notification about those groups. Okay, let's get into this episode. I loved this conversation coming up so much. It was so nourishing for me. And it came at a perfect time because I've been thinking a lot about psychology and about how the phenomenon seems to develop us psychologically and spiritually if we take the opportunity to go down that road. And I've been thinking a lot about the kind of normalization and deadening of the word psychology and like what we think it is and what it means. And even words like dreams or archetypes or the subconscious, like all of those words that have really become integrated into our language and our culture, they sound quite prosaic when we say them. And then the reality is like, what the hell is a dream? What is that? Rational materialist framework would have us believe that it's just the brain getting rid of a bunch of useless things, right? In fact, if we dig a little bit deeper, if we just scratch the surface, the reality of what a dream is kind of dissolves into a great unknowing. Psychology, the interiority, the sacred interior landscape is extraordinary and wild, and we know nothing about it. It's very mysterious. It's very mystical. It's kind of the heart of mystery itself, of the mystery itself. This interiority, the psyche, which actually originally means soul or spirit. The psyche, the ways that we engage with the sacred interior, and spoiler, like how it seems to interact with the so-called external world in ways that defy the materialist worldview. In other words, our experiences change when we change. And many of us have had this direct experience, and we can see other people, spiritual teachers and spiritual traditions that are thousands of years old that tell us the same thing, that our experiences change when we change. And that goes with our phenomenal experiences as well, or lack thereof even. If somebody wants to start having extraordinary experiences, there seems to be a path to that, and part of that path is engaging with the psyche. So this has been on my mind so much, and when I planned to meet with Brendon, who is a scientist and a father, a husband, and an experiencer, I did not know that that's where our conversation would go, and I was really pleased and excited to hear him talk about these things in such a deep and beautiful way. He brought forward some ideas that I had been kicking around, again, about the psyche, the subconscious, about developing my own relationship with newly emerging interior archetypes. And he expressed it in a way that felt extremely connected to his own extraordinary experiences and was also very emotionally honest and grounded. This is an old school experiencer telling. Yeah, we also talk about disclosure and ufology and question why they're so centered in the collective around the military-industrial complex. Like, why is that? Brendon invites inquiry into this, and he and I both agree that we're undergoing not only personal initiations, many of us are, but that the collective itself is being offered its own initiatory journey into something new. And as you guys know, if you know me at all, like all of this is just so deeply my jam. I loved it. We recorded this on January 31st, which was the last day of the longest month that is ever, especially here in the United States. So I truly hope that you enjoy this wonderful talk with experiencer Brendon.
And the more I reflect on it, the more I realize that anomalous experiences were part of my life. Like if I think back to being a child, there was a lot of going to see my parents in the night, being told, "Don't be silly," you know, you didn't see that thing that you, in the doorway of your bedroom or something like that, and sleeping with the light on. And when I was much younger, I had a really irrational terrified fear of the bedroom windows.
Hmm.
And I don't know why that is. I don't have any particular memory associated with it, but it occurred to me the other day there must have been a reason for why I had that feeling. Um, I've always sort of thought of it up until most recently as you're a kid and your imagination runs away with you and things like that. But if my more recent experiences are anything to go by, uh, we don't assign sufficient reality to that sort of space, that imagination space, and so probably uh, I was writing off and ignoring things actually for a long time, and so uh, maybe the universe needed to give me a bit of a whack in the head to to really say, no, you need to be paying attention to this kind of thing. So I'd had a lot of, I wouldn't say a lot, but I'd had experiences in my life, like I had one interesting experience I had. I remember I was in my early 20s when I was doing my chemistry PhD, and I had the fortune of traveling to a conference in the United States, and I have family in England, so I got a round the world ticket. Might as well when you're flying from Australia to the east coast of America. You're basically halfway around the world, so you might as well keep going. And when I was at one of my relatives' houses in England, I was aware that she had a friend that used to come to her house, and that friend was annoying to her because she used to smoke in her house. So anyway, I walked into the lounge room, and there was this incredibly strong, sweet, like smell of pipe tobacco.
Mhm.
It was incredibly intense to me. But it might as well have been walking into a pub. It was that strong. And I thought, oh, that person must have been here. And so I went and sat down and having a chat with my great uncles and aunties that I was visiting. And I said, "Oh, have you had that friend over that smokes in your house?" And she's not a great auntie, she's a cousin. She looked at me and she was like, "No, that friend hasn't been over for years." And my great uncle and auntie looked kind of like shocked, and they looked at each other. And I said, "Well, you can't. The smells incredibly intense over there." So they walked over and they couldn't smell anything. And then subsequent to that, all these stories came out of different people in my family having smelt that smell,
Mhm.
and that they associated it with one of my deceased relatives letting you know that they're around. So it kind of freaked everybody out. Oh, Brendan smelt it, and he doesn't know anything about this story, and he doesn't know who it is supposed to be. Um, and so I spent that rest of that trip sleeping hidden under my doona, completely sort of like terrified what the hell was what was going on. But then, nothing happens after that. And you just sort of go, you know, maybe that's just your imagination as well. Or I started to kind of go, well, I started developing conceptions within a psychological framework that would help me to explain away those things rather than give them more reality. So I started to think, well, maybe it's our subconsciouses are somehow manifesting this thing. It's not actually a real thing. It's just somehow we've got this particular idea that is appearing for us, and we're interpreting it as a ghost or a disincarnate, a relative, but it's probably not. It's just some figment of our imagination that somehow we all share because we're all kind of related. And I remember nothing happened that I can really recall um, for another 7 years or so when I was about 29. And I was on a big round the world trip with my wife, and we got to Easter Island, and I was lying on the bed in Easter Island that night, and I perceived this big black sort of shadow came up to the side of the bed, and it was talking to me in another language, but I understood what it was saying. So, which was it was quite a strange experience, and it was saying, "What are you doing here? How come you're here?" Like it knew me somehow, and I have obviously never been to Easter Island before, and so I turned my back on it, and I was trying to like ignore it and hide, and that just seemed to agitate it more and more. And as it got more agitated, the sound got higher and higher and higher pitched, like as it was getting irritated that I wasn't interacting with it. And eventually I just sat up in the bed and said, fuck off, F off, basically waking people up where we were sleeping. And it did go away then. So I had that experience, and I told my wife about it that morning. And then we went on this tour. So the people that ran the hotel, the lady that owned the hotel was a native Rapa Nui from Easter Island, and her husband was the producer of the movie Rapa Nui. I don't know whether you've ever seen that. It's about the Birdman culture from Easter Island, and he'd done the he'd done the movie and met her there, and decided to stay on Easter Island and run this motel. But when we were on the tour of Easter Island, he was constantly bringing up these stories of his great grandfather, well, not great grandfather, what would it be, great grandfather in law,
Mm.
and how he'd had an amazing life, and he was a sort of a shaman type, and that he had to be careful what he did on the island because if he, moved a rock to the wrong place or something like that, he would go home and his wife would say, "Did you move a rock somewhere? Because my my grandfather came and said that this thing happened." And this really disturbed me and my wife because, again, I wrote that original experience off where I had that big black shadow or shade beside the bed as, yeah, you're just sort of waking up or whatever, or it's just some kind of dreamscape that somehow I was lucid in, or it was an imagination. It was not real.
Mm.
Again, it's not real. And so I went and I went to the foyer to speak to her and say, we've just heard these stories from your husband, and this is what happened to me. And as I started to mention it in the foyer, there wasn't just her, but all her sisters, and they all just sort of disappeared really quickly from the space. And she just said, "Oh, I'm sorry that that was a negative experience for you, and don't worry." And she, just kind of tried to, calm me down because it was a bit of a disturbance, I guess, that I'd had that experience. And then here's this guy talking about his experiences with this particular person. Yeah, I didn't know what to do with it, and not knowing what to do with it is kind of a theme, I think, for me up until very recently. So that I'd have little flashes, like I might see something in the corner of my eye or something like that, but I really wrote all of those kinds of things off. And I had a very interesting experience when I was 35, where I met somebody who came to work my workplace, and he was training all of our government employees. And he worked with the UN and World Health Organization. He has an Order of Australia, and he does a lot in the space of bringing people together and trying to foster agreements between different groups that might have very disparate interests or motivations or needs. He's incredibly skilled in that area. And he was talking about all kinds of strange things about being able to adopt another person's consciousness and the things you can do with consciousness. And I was thinking to myself, okay, this is very, very odd. Like, this is not a normal public service government, training seminar. This is really, really strange. I don't understand why everybody is kind of prepared to sit and listen to this. And then he looked at me and he said, I'm going to show you how I can speak directly to you whilst also appearing to be speaking to everybody else. And he walked over to a board and he just sort of he did it. He wrote things up on the board, and I understood exactly what he was saying. Um, but that no one else seemed to register what the hell was going on. At that stage in my life, I was very much, it wasn't that I wasn't inquisitive. I mean, obviously I had a chemistry PhD, and that kind of helps, I guess, to frame where my mind was. It was very materialist, reductionist, fighting against these, these experiences and the reality or potential reality of them. You can't acknowledge that if you're a trained scientist. And someone came into the room who I later found out had autism, and he was really struggling with the conversation that was going on, and it was disrupting the lecture. And that made me, my stomach was feeling really, really tight, really sort of sick. And I said to him, the person lecturing after this man that had come in had been quite disruptive, and he'd left because he wasn't interested anymore. I said, well, why did that guy that had come in make me feel so sick in my stomach? And he just looked at me and he said, do you think he came in here to make you feel that way in your stomach? And somehow the way he said it, and presumably the things that he'd said to me previously, a bomb went off in my head that all of these things I was creating myself. You know, I was still in a stage of psychological development where I was blaming things exterior to myself for my own experiences, as opposed to realizing, oh, I have control over those inner experiences and I should notice them because they're actually signs of where I have certain attachments, or, you know, that person was acting in a way that I would never have acted in that space. And so I was getting sick in my stomach because it was kind of disgusting to me, I suppose, or, you know, so metaphorically, it's like if something's disgusting, what happens? You get a stomach ache. And so that tumbled through all of my conceptions of my interactions with other people, with basically everything in my life. And I spent an entire week. Something happened. My brain kind of, I used to refer to it as my brain cracking. And I had a whole week where I was just in this sort of state of incredible bliss. I didn't have any anxiety. Like I walked out from the lecture and after this had happened, and I just sat outside in the rain, and it felt like I could see different colors. I probably could see different types of colors. And and I thought, oh, this is amazing. Like I've been released from all of my stresses and my anxiety. This is incredible. This state that I was in, I felt like I was connected to other people, and I had this strange thing happening to me where I would talk to someone, I'd say something, and then I had this feeling that what I had said had somehow prompted what their response was, rather than um, the conception that I had before of that person necessarily had decided what they were going to say. And it was eliciting for some reason this uncontrollable laughter, which I had to try and explain away and say, "Oh, I'm just sorry. I'm thinking about a joke that happened earlier in my day." And as you go through esoteric training that I'm doing now, which connects a lot with psychological development in certain ways, you do learn about how you should be very careful in the way that you select the words that you use. And I I suspect there was sort of a lesson there that I was being taught, but perhaps wasn't quite ready to receive. And then after a week, it just went away, and I was back in this body that has really tight shoulders and has a lot of anxiety about things and stressed and all of that kind of stuff. But I couldn't explain away that week. I went and saw a psychiatrist and described it to him, and he couldn't really explain it. And it was around that time then that I started really going, there's something else, like there's more going on, but coming at it from a very scientific perspective. So I started really studying Chomsky, but not the Chomsky that most people recognize, though some of that stuff. Most people think of Chomsky from the perspective of his thoughts in the political sphere. But the most interesting aspects of Chomsky, I think, are his philosophical conceptions around how words are not referential; they're not directly connected, and ideas of poverty of stimulus, for example, which is really a anomalous thing that everybody can observe in their kids if they want to. And this is just before my daughter was born. And I got to actually observe the poverty of stimulus. So the poverty of stimulus is that there's currently no explanation for how we learn language. If the rate at which a child is learning what a word means is incredibly rapid. They learn what a chair is, for example, on one or two exposures of the word. And then how do they know that when you say chair in front of them, there's a chair over there, that you're referring to that whole chair and not just the legs or just the seat?
Mm.
Because you don't explicitly teach that to them. And then how do they learn all of the semantic properties of what a chair can be? Right? They don't just look at that particular chair and go, well, that is a chair. They then can recognize all the chairs, right? Without having been taught just on a one exposure to the word. And this is happening every day,
Mm.
whether it's tree or river or any word. So we sit in this kind of world where we think, oh, the way that we learn language is by exposure and reference, but it just doesn't hold up. It doesn't make sense because you're not really going taking a 2-year-old up to a tree and saying this is a tree, and then showing them a completely different looking type of tree and going, well, you can call that a tree as well, and this is a river and it's got water in it, but also guess what? When there's no water in the river, we still call it a river, and that's really weird, isn't it? Yeah, they just know it, right? They just know it naturally. So there's got to be some kind of predisposition for it. But then how are they accessing that? No one really, no one really knows. So that was, I think, a really important aspect of getting me to a place for where I was when I joined the experiencer group, because I got to a certain point where I was psychologically developed, from the perspective of understanding that the materialist reductionist perspective of things couldn't answer everything, even within the scientific realm. And I was very comfortable with that, in that, it just indicated that science wasn't done, it wasn't finished, even though sometimes you would think, with the way that physicists and skeptics and so on talk about anomalous experiences, you would think that physics was over. But they might as well pack up and go home. There's nothing else to discover. So let's just stop now. We can save all the money that we're sending to the universities. That's kind of a summary of my background before. As I think I've mentioned to you before, Jay sometimes in his interviews says that people come into the experiencer group sort of screaming the F, what is going on? And that was definitely me
Mm.
coming into the experiencer group, because it was pretty full on what I experienced at that time. Looking back on it with retrospect, I can see how certain things had happened in my life, including like an anxiety attack that occurred to me after I finished my doctoral thesis, just from all the stress and the work and so on. And the experience of that is like your body, you become detached from it. Your body just starts doing things that, and you lose control of it, and it's terrifying. I had so much therapy associated with that. And I look back on it and I think to myself, well, was that actually trying to get me to a place where I could have the experiences that I had when I was 42?
Mm.
Because it made me less less associated just with my physical self. Is that what that was for? We always hear in experiencer stories some kind of traumatic experience. It took me a long time to get over that really severe anxiety attack, like to be able to go outside again and have confidence that I'd be able to control my body when I went outside. It took months for me to get over that. And there's even a small extent where today I still struggle with the remnants of that experience and some of the after effects of it. Um, and because of the way that society's kind of evolved, rather than, I kind of wonder if in another culture or another time, someone wiser might have recognized that as, you know, maybe for what it is, as opposed to pathologizing it and putting me on medication and
Mhm.
sending me to therapy to deal with certain things. I don't know. It's just a thought that I have in my mind.
Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing all of that. I am really resonating with the reality as, people who have some kind of extraordinary experience that's either very traumatic or, they are what they are. They're sort of this shocking, it's ontologically shocking experience. And how often part of the process is that we then look back at our history. We look back over our lives and then go, oh, well, there were other things. It just didn't fit into the concept of reality. So there was no space for them. And how extraordinary it is looking back and finding the connection and seeing that. I mean, even the idea, I've been thinking about this a lot about psychology and the psyche and Jungian psychology and the subconscious, and you talking about, maybe this is just a manifestation of my subconscious in front of me, but it's not quote unquote real. And like, even that is extraordinary and bizarre, even the fact, like, if that's what it is, that alone is to me feels mystical. And there's this great like normalization of everything in rational materialist framework that leaves no space for the extraordinary. But even if that were the answer, it would be extraordinary. So, yeah, thank you. I love that history, and I love the kind of reworking of the past through the new lens, which is a very common experience for almost every experiencer. So, I know lots of people will be resonating with that. And I would love to hear if you want to share, yeah, what happened next.
Yeah, so my story, in a way, differs, I think, from the sort of typical experience in that I was obviously still at the age of 42. I was still thinking of myself as a materialist reductionist, but I had um, I had read Jung extensively. I was starting to see the world through the eyes of archetypes, and I had not seen a UFO or any of that kind of stuff. I'd obviously had the experiences that I spoke to you about before, but I hadn't seen any. There was no like UFO that kicked things off, and then I had hitchhiker effects or these kinds of things. I was just basically going about my daily life, but I was driving around in my car and thinking in my head, I know this isn't real, I know that there's more going on. Like there's too many mysteries that I've now uncovered, like poverty of stimulus, for example, or being able to recognize the types of archetypes that people were playing out within group settings, for example. I know there's more going on. I was saying that in my head. I often wonder maybe someone was listening to that. I think that that kind of earlier experience that brought me from being more extroverted in terms of my perspective of the world, like living outside of myself and the things outside of myself, being blamed for my own personal state. I think I'd moved to a place where, if you were on the Briggs-Myers scale, I was definitely in that introverted space, which I think is probably critical to an experiencer if they're going to have I think the kind of experience perhaps that I had, or at least a traveling through that experience in a way that you can integrate. And it started off for me, and most of my experiences, frankly, were not negative or terrifying when I look back on them. They were terrifying, but again, I was making them terrifying, really. That's what I'd learned, right? Ultimately, that you're the author of how you interpret those kinds of experiences. You don't have to consider them terrifying. And it really kicked off with a lot of extremely lucid dreaming, like a ability to dream that I'd never had before, and even to the point of being able to wake up in a dream and go and get some water or something like that, and then just think about that dream again, and bang, I was straight back in it, and I was loving it. I was having a great time with these lucid dreams, and I said to my relatives, I'm having all these lucid dreams these days. It's wonderful. I'll have a dream, and I'm in a house that I somehow now I remember that I've dreamt about this house tens and tens of times, and always I couldn't open certain doors and things like that. But for some reason, I can open the doors that I couldn't open before. You sort of see the symbolism here that's kind of getting me ready for something, right? Like we're going to show you something, and you're going to be shown in those doors now. The subconscious is telling you something, but again, I was still in that space of, well, it's just a dream. For some strange reason, they're extremely lucid and I can do things in them and I'm completely aware and I'm interacting with people and I'm recalling that I've dreamt these things many, 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 many times before in my life. But again, they're just dreams. It's nothing. It's not real. And then things started to move from the dream space and move into the conscious space, or definitely the liminal space initially. And that's when I started to get ontologically shocked, let's put it that way, right? And the first experience of that was really seeing a sort of like a look kind of like a lightning bolt type um, cloud or shade or something like that at the doorway to the bedroom, and it flew over the top of me and it disabled me down one part of my body, um, and asked me in this threatening voice, "Where's your sister?" And then it flew away, and I'm left there flopping on the bed with one side of my body. Oh, what has happened to me? What was that? And fortunately, I'd had the experience at Easter Island, right? I'd had the experience with my family in England. So I at least had that somehow was sitting in my mind going, well, you did see something, right? Um, and although you might have had a stroke, perhaps it's something just to do with these weird dreams that you've been having. So how about you just go back to sleep and maybe you'll be okay. Somehow, even though I mean, it was a pretty disturbing experience, but I had come to a place where I had sufficient experience still to go with it, even though it was quite, you know, disturbing and terrifying to experience. So I went back to sleep and I woke up and I was fine. And that kept happening. This strange spirit or shade at the door coming and disturbing me, and then there'd be huge bangs going off, like lightning going off in my bedroom, and it wasn't just me that was hearing that as well. Yeah, my wife would say it sounds like a bowling ball's been dropped in the house. What on earth is going on? And that's where things sort of started. And I started to try to look for answers, but I couldn't find any. I had a lot of I was aware of things like um, archetypes. I was aware of, to an extent, though not with any utility yet, introversion and extroversion. I was aware of projection, that kind of psychology. But I wasn't in a space yet where I knew how to utilize that to take it and experience and try and invert it from being a fearful, terrible thing into something that advances my consciousness or advances my perspective of the world, which I think is hinting at a broader theme that is significantly missing from all of this kind of disclosure and um, you know narrative that's out there at the moment. It's missing a very significant portion of the experiencer story, which is the transformational aspects that happen with experiences as they go. But that's a sort of aside, I guess, at the moment. But so I was really at a loss of what to do. So I wound up going and seeing a medium because my perception of what was happening to me was that I had a ghost in my house, because this is the only sort of framework that I could grab onto was movies and things like that, right? So I had a ghost in my house, was attacking me in the mornings, and I used my understanding of psychology to go, well, perhaps this is just my subconscious messing with me. It's not real, but I'm going to go through the processes of going and seeing a medium because that might settle my subconscious down and then I'll be fine. Right. So still not real, still, even at that point, it is not real. Uh, I was seeing sort of distortions on the stairs in my house. I was seeing lights to the side of my eyes, like gold lights and things like that. But again, I didn't pay it any. any particular attention. And eventually, after seeing one medium referred me to another medium, and that medium was like a minister or head of a spiritualist church. And she said a couple of things. She said that she thought that it wasn't all spiritual, that there were aliens involved in this, and to be careful who I talk about with that, because she said you can come to a spiritualist church for help, but if you mention that aliens are involved, they won't accept that because they don't believe in aliens. Okay, what on earth is going on here? And she said we need to do a house clearing. And so I left that meeting with the medium after being told that information. And I was having these periods in that time where I was able to think with an incredible amount of clarity. Like my mind now almost feels like I'm hungover all the time somehow. It's really dulled down, but during these experiences, it was really clear and very strong. And again, like I was saying, to you about going and seeing the medium and sort of playing out a role in the hopes that it might, settle things down. I was like, oh, well, I'm going to play out the role. I'm going to imagine that there are aliens involved in this. And how would I want to deal with that? Well, um, if that was to be true, the way that I would want to deal with it would be with a very positive energy and a welcoming kind of energy to these aliens. That's what I would want. I wouldn't want, if aliens were to come to Earth, I wouldn't want people to get really, I'm going to bash them up or I'm going to shoot them or things like that. I would want to have that kind of approach. Again, just thinking in my head in the car on the way home, but with this very light, clear mind. And when I got home, I went to the kitchen and it was nighttime by that time. So yeah, the sun had gone down and I went to the sink and this sort of ball of black darkness came out of my mouth and flew away. And then I took my dogs outside, and that's when I had the first experience that I really felt like I can't write this off as my imagination and unreality, that this is beyond that. And basically, I walked outside and I looked up into the sky, and there was this massive ball of orange red. People tend to call it plasma in, if their experiences, like it looked like flame or something like that to me. And it was sitting up in the sky, and I looked at it and I felt my entire worldview just collapsing. And I mean, when I say felt, I felt it physically in my body, like just gone, wiped. I can't I can't say this is, me coming out of a dream or in a dream. I stood outside my house and I felt connected to it. I had a feeling which I could only describe of as a feeling of sacred. That's how I describe it. I've never had that feeling before. I've never had it since, frankly, of feeling of sacred. And I said in my head, move to the right, and it did. It moved to the right. And then I said, you're now going to blink on and off, and you're going to disappear. And so it blinked on and off a few times, and then it disappeared. And I was just, um, oh, it's still affecting me. There you go. I was left there sort of dumbstruck with this feeling of that must be what it's like to have seen an angel. That's what I thought to myself. Uh, but I didn't know what to do with it. But it put me in this position of you now need to reconsider who you are. You now need to consider where you are. You now need to consider what is going on all together. Everything needs to be wiped. You have to start working on building a new conception of what this is all about. And so there were a lot of experiences after that that um, were part of, I think, that journey to coming to where I am now. But it was extremely difficult. I was having experiences all the time. Like I was seeing lights in my house. I was encountering disincarnate relatives in my house, and they would pop up as like a sort of, so it would look like a kind of a light, and then I would feel what I've come to understand is a subtle matter, subtle substance, hit me just above the belly button, below the sternum, which at the time I didn't know that that's actually supposed to be where, you know, the center of astral clairvoyance is kind of the sensory organ is in your subtle body in that space. I didn't know that. And I'd be hit by that, and I would hear what they had to say, feel the emotions they were trying to communicate to me. I would see an image that came like all at once, everything all at once. And I'm spending all of this time on the internet trying to work out what the hell is going on with me, spending exorbitant amount of money with spiritual people. I say that in quotations, and I spent $450. It was a lot of money for me going and seeing a Kundalini yoga practitioner because I had an experience that aligned with what I had heard people describe as a Kundalini awakening. Um, because in mornings I would see a sort of a distortion at the bottom of my feet, and then it would run through my body, and every atom of my body was like vibrating, and there was this really high pitched noise in my ears, and it felt dense, like I was underwater, and I would have visions of things and be told things while I was in this strange energy that kept hitting me at 5 o'clock in the morning to the point where I couldn't take it anymore because I'm a father and I'm working, and here's all this crazy stuff happening to me. And I eventually said, look, you've got to find a different way to do this because I can't, this is too much. And after I said that, it did change. It changed to, rather than being this really intense experience, I would wake up, and this is where the whole sleep paralysis kind of thing comes in, right? I would wake up, but I was completely conscious, but my body wouldn't be able to move, and I would just be lightly being pulsed with energy or in different parts of my body. So, the experiences were really intense. They were daily. They were changing a little bits over time, but I wasn't completely clear on how to deal with it or how to get through it. I didn't know what was happening to me, and because I'd seen that ball of fire in the air, I suppose that's why I kind of, and what the medium said, that I kind of aliens with things. Um, and then eventually I joined the experiencer group, and in the experiencer group, I found a couple of people that were very helpful. And one in particular, she eventually, after she'd heard my story of what had happened, the night before or the day before, many, many times, she said, "Oh, I've been told to tell you to get this book called Initiated by Matthew Roberts." And I'd never heard of him. Yeah, knew nothing about him. So I looked up his book, I ordered it, and I I watched a couple of interviews and I thought this is kind of interesting. He's talking about Jungian archetypes. He's talking about introversion and extroversion. These are all things that I was familiar with, but I didn't know how to utilize as tools, I guess. Um, but that book initiated for me was really, really critical ultimately because it helped me realize that the broader context there's just so many experiences that I could talk about, frankly. We could be here all day, all day. Uh, that's the scale of it. Um, I can tell you about the final experience that I had that kind of signaled the end of the really intense experiences, and that involved um, me going outside and um, my dogs came outside with me. Dogs were involved again. I'm sure there's something symbolic to that. And they were skipping around and, really excited. And then my daughter came outside and she was skipping around and she was really happy. And this is enchanted. This is so beautiful. What's happening at the moment? And I was looking down and I thought to myself, you're going to show me something. This is really beautiful. I know what you're going to do. You're going to show me something. I looked up in the sky and I saw this orange ball in the sky, and I called my daughter over and I put my arm around her and I said, "Look at that." And I didn't tell her what I thought it might be or anything like that. I don't do that. I don't interpret things for other people like that. I don't think I should define other people's experiences. And we just sort of stood there together and with my arm around her and watched this orange ball just flow across the sky. It was not, it was definitely not a satellite. It was definitely not a flare. It was none of those things, the way that it moves. And afterwards, I was in tears because it was just such a beautiful experience. And I'd reached a stage, fortunately, by then, because one of the things in Initiated, there was a couple of things in Initiated that really were critical to my getting through that really difficult period of my experiences. But one of those was you have to get to a point where you eliminate fear. You have to get to a point where you become kind of indestructible, is what you are. And I was at that stage then, like I reached that point, and I thought I'm gonna go to bed. I'm gonna meditate, and I'm going to say thank you for that experience. Like I'm gonna project myself out into the universe and just say thank you so much because that for some reason that experience I felt like it was incredibly beautiful. And I did that, and I started to see golden flames in my eyes, and I saw a gold sphere appear, gold sphere or disc or something like that out in front of me, and then it split into three golden light beings that were in robes, these golden robes. And I remember the intensity is the best I can. I don't have a word really for what it was like trying to be in the presence of that. Um, the intensity, it was so hard to maintain my physical conscious self. And I said to them, "Who are you?" I just was able to mouth and just get out of my mouth, "Who are you?" And they said, "We're." I'm just going to tell you what they said, and people can interpret it how they want to. They said, "We're divine light, and we're going to be working with you now." And then I was, I sort of came out of my body, which was a common experience across this period of time. And I had a conversation with them where I was told a couple of things that seemed to be about what my purpose and role was supposed to be here. And then I'm aware that I had a very long conversation. It was a really big discussion, but when I came back into my physical body, I was only allowed to keep a couple of stories, a couple of components of that. And I've sometimes thought to myself, I could go and get hypnotic regression and maybe I could dig those things out. But then I sometimes think to myself, no, you know, that those things were withheld for a reason and they'll come to you when you're ready for those things. Don't go digging around where you're not supposed to be digging. And so I haven't done that. That was like, the end story for me was really of love overcoming fear. That's what that experience was. And also the other aspect of initiated that really helped me was to realize that it's about this is all really about your psychological development and ability to perceive the world to the extent that you're psychologically developed, like I discussed earlier, where you think everything is against you and it's all outside of yourself. Your perception is very, very limited. And I actually think your free will is very limited too, because if you imagine, like, every time somebody says something nasty to you, you get angry and they made you angry. Okay, well, if they made you angry, what control have I got over my life? If you're thinking that way all the time, but if you get yourself to a position where you don't look at things like that. You don't look at yourself as disconnected from the experiences around you, but realize that they're part of the sort of learning journey that you're supposed to use to develop yourself psychologically. Then you're able to perceive more, I think, and you're able to experience more. Like, when the student's ready, the teacher will appear. And I think that that's a big component of it that comes into not just me getting probably the book, frankly, um, but that whole experience is really about that development, and it changed me fundamentally as a person in so many ways that I see the world. And I'd go back to the segue or the comment that I talked about earlier, where in this whole disclosure movement, there's this hyper focus, right, on military and government disclosure. And there's also, I think mistakenly, a hyper focus on individuals' experiences. Because, yes, individuals have experiences, but also we're a humanity. We're also a being in that sense as well. And to exclude the larger perspective of that this is just my opinion, that experiences with the phenomenon are about your spiritual growth and your psychological growth. Um, to ignore that as a story really has us lost, I think, uh, and unable to interpret what's happening. But it kind of makes sense to me when I look at it, because I think to myself, well, what if as a humanity, we're also going through these cycles of spiritual growth? And what if we throw archetypes into the mix? Does that help us to understand things? Well, probably it does, right? So, who would go first into battle in the dark night of the soul? You have to elicit your inner military person, right? Your inner person that would jump out of the trenches and run at the machine guns. That's the kind of person you have to bring about in your persona, in your mind, in your psyche, to be able to handle the experiences that are coming at you. And then you might go through the development of other archetypes to bring about a whole person with a holistic view of your experiences. But at the moment, what we've got is this why is everybody so focused, on military and government or military disclosure? Why are they so focused? Well, because maybe that's the first step in a broader story of development. They're the people that embody that first archetype that will jump out of the trenches and run at the machine guns. And then who comes after that? Well, the priests and the medics enter the battlefield, and they go and administer last rites, or they're going to, patch people up and things like that. And rather than looking at disclosure from the perspective of we are one humanity, one person going through a process, and a part of our collective body is trying to tell us something, and it's expressing itself through the military. And next will come whoever embodies, the priest or that particular archetype. And who might come after that? Well, then it might be the teachers and academics to try and synthesize what we've been exposed to through that. We're hyper focused on these individuals from the military and their individual experiences. And when you do that, everything kind of doesn't make sense. That you get high strangeness on a kind of global scale because you're not maybe looking at it in a broader context.
No, I just want to thank you so much for all of the telling and for sharing your personal experiences. I felt very emotionally connected to all of it. And I want to touch on several things that you said, but just to say that this framework that you're bringing in about parts of us as a whole, parts of humanity as a whole, and the kind of evolution of the collective as one body, and that these are archetypal parts that are coming out as they would, is brilliant. And I love it. And it's, as per usual with these kind of conversations, it's very synchronistic, these are things that I've been thinking about. I've really been thinking about archetypes and the psyche. And, one for me that's really big is the goddess, the feminine. Why does she also show up for experiencers and around, military people as well, and all of this. So that's just a personal one for me. But yeah, I love that. It makes a ton of sense to me. I do think that without a broader perspective or some sort of framework like that, like you said, it's just kind of absurdity on a grand scale, or high strangeness on a grand scale. And what do we do with it? And
Mm.
also synchronistically, it makes perfect sense. I was thinking about Matthew Roberts and his book
Mhm.
Initiation, which I've never read, but I've heard it talked about, and I was thinking about that book yesterday and thinking about the broad story here, and the broad story
Mm.
of human, psychological and spiritual development, which is, I also, that's the framework that I've landed in as well. That
Mm.
the phenomenon, my experience with it was that it brought me, and it continues to bring me through those doorways of psychological and spiritual development. And the book for me that really did that is a book called Fire in the Head, which is about Celtic shamanism. And just reading the first, 30 pages of it or something, I was like, oh my God, it's the same. Oh yeah, of course you have it on yourself right there. Yeah, it's so good. And you've got it bookmarked, I see, and you're into it. Yeah. It's the same. It's the same. It's the same story. And it's just really beautiful. So many things that I want to touch on. One that just came to me that I think I'll tug on that thread a little bit is, you're having these state experiences of love, basically, and joy and beauty and enchantment. And then that's when they appear, or there's that feeling associated with a couple of your experiences. And I think one of the bizarre and wonderful things that's happening right now in disclosure is that people are, who are in the military or who have been and who've had these experiences are starting to report the other anomalous things that are happening in relation. And that's a theme as well. There's this theme of, people, Jake or Fred Baker rather, talking about doing CE5 and projecting out love and then having an experience. And I have, as always with this stuff, I think that there's subtlety. I think that there's nuance. I don't think that, I know that a lot of people have had that experience and had a very negative or terrifying experience. Like in this world of the phenomenon, I don't think it's very hard to come to a solid, yes, this is the way that it always is for every person. But there does seem to be something to that, something, there's love here. And it is developmental, as you were talking about. There's something about moving through fear into love. There is something about externalizing the world and seeing it all coming at us, and we're sort of victims of it. And then having the experience at some point of becoming co-creators, or realizing that there's some relationship here happening between my own interiority and the external world, particularly in relation to these phenomenal experiences. So, yeah, so much resonance there. The three beings who came to you made me think of the four who are one. That's what I call them. This group of four light beings, I guess. I don't know. That works as well as anything does. That my first experience with them that I consciously remember, is they rose up out of the horizon line and were enormous and said, "We're here for you when you're ready." And then worked with me. Similarly, you describing kind of being paralyzed and having this energy moving through the body. And what I feel happened in some of my experiences is that they would paralyze me and then pull me out of my body. It was sort of an induced out of body experience. But once I started working on my own empowerment, like agency, and worked on getting my fear under control, which I did through the help of I was like, all right, my unseen team, my helpers, please come and help me with this, because I'm terrified and I don't know how to do it. And I got instruction around that. And I started working with helpers. And then the experiences started to change. Once fear was reduced, once empowerment and agency came on board, then they would be next to me, and this vibration would sort of be next to me, and they would like poach me out of my body. And instead of it feeling like this non-consensual thing, which it felt like for a really long time, it started to feel like a teaching. And so I just hearing a lot of resonance with my own story, that this is a journey towards something. And, the perspective of disclosure and the government and this coming through the military industrial lens in many ways makes total sense to me, because that's also where all of our collective energy is pointed in terms of authority. It's like, well, these people are in charge and know what they're doing. So if there is something that's going to come through, it seems like it would come through maybe the sort of like densest materialist realm that we can think of. And I really love that framework of, us being a collective body, and this is happening through us. And I don't know how quickly that level of conversation gets into the broader realms. I mean, I don't, it's going to be really interesting to see as an experiencer and as someone who's gone through this and has this framework. Do you feel that we will see a similar thing happen in the collective, or it's hard to imagine, but I'm very hopeful. I just don't know if I'll see it in my lifetime.
Whether it happens in our lifetime, I really don't know. But it makes sense. Like if you think about some of the themes that you just brought up and that I've been discussing as well, who extroverts fear out into the world more explicitly than the military? Going and blowing up farmers in Afghanistan, or shooting people with machine guns and things like that and killing people. Isn't that an external use of that kind of archetypal energy that should be directed inside? We were talking about getting over fear. When we say you needed to get over fear, or I needed to get over fear, we're talking about our internal psychological development, right? And I'm a teacher now. I'm a school teacher, and every teacher is told, and every teacher knows that unless a student feels safe in your classroom and relaxed and connected to you and not fearful, they won't be able to learn anything. Fear just shuts down all of your learning mechanisms. And the unconscious or the subconscious, sorry, it knows. I had experiences where I was taken out of my body by a sort of energy next to me. And but it's funny because I was listening to Kelly Chase basically describe the exact same experience on a podcast the other day. I'd be taken out of my body. Sometimes I'd be given something of a life review where I'd be shown a difficult part of my life and given the right perception of how I should have looked at that. And I'd come out of that in tears because I'd be like, oh my God, why did I do that to myself? And then I had other experiences of that where I was told that I had apparently volunteered to go through this whole process. And I was told specific things that I'm supposed to do now in the world. And in that state, I had access to, I know I had access to memory of every single second of my life. And everything, all the weird experiences and everything, they all made complete sense to me. As I think it kind of reach a synthesis between the conscious and subconscious. You get access to these, to these understandings. And there was a voice. It was just behind me, and it was never the difference for me. If I'm thinking about what Kelly Chase described was in those experiences, I didn't feel either love or hate or any kind of emotion. It was just very matter of fact. And you should not have done this, or this is what we want you to do. But it wasn't accompanied with any judgment in any direction. It was just very like flat out, this is what it is. And so, as a collective, our subconscious also knows, right? It also knows everything and will try and manifest things in our conscious world, I think. And who really needs to deal with that fear archetype, or the archetypes associated with fear, more than someone who would go into the military and kill people? That to me makes complete sense. Whether I'm using the right words to describe it, or I don't assign blame, or I can imagine someone listening to me and feeling offense because they're thinking, well, I'm putting blame out there. No, these these are just aspects of our psyche that need to be processed. And some people are better at manifesting those aspects than others, and that directs them towards those sorts of expressions. But the road really ultimately needs to be to understand that, contrary to the way that we tend to think, that what's outside ourselves is actually a conscious real world. It's the manifestation of the subconscious. Everything that you see around you has come out of someone's imagination, right? And acting out in the world, that's what it is. It's bringing the subconscious and utilizing it in the exterior world. So, you know, I don't blame people for having gone down that pathway to dropping bombs on other people, particularly in a society where we don't acknowledge the reality of the internal world. We don't acknowledge or have any kind of framework that explains why we're here to develop our psychology and develop along a sort of spiritual line. So, unless you do the work to come to an understanding of that, and probably you need to have some kind of, the experiences, the gnosis helps to solidify that as a real thing. Then you are going to be acting out. You are going to be extroverting these things all over the place because we don't have the social structures that perhaps used to be around that would go and grab that person and force them to push that archetypal energy back into themselves. Instead, in this culture where the extroversion of archetypes is celebrated, and that's the only thing that's real, and the sooner we come to a realization that that is just the pathway to destruction, and not learning anything, the better. But I don't know how long that's going to take. But I kind of think that at some point we'll start to realize, hold on a second, it's not just the military that has secrets. What about the Vatican? What about disclosure from them? What did they do at the Council of Nicaea? Why did they remove the doctrine of the soul and remove any framework of reincarnation and these things? I'm sure that they know. I'm sure that those histories are there, but they won't let you go and read the books underneath. Why are they extroverting a different archetype that withholds knowledge and keeps it for itself, squirrels it away, and wants to control other people? So hopefully, if we start to see a refocusing, like, and I can see it, right? Like, I can see people like Graham Hancock going, there's odd things that have been going on in history, and Diana Pasulka going and looking in the archives and saying, it looks like this nun actually was able to teleport her consciousness over to, the United States. Like there are little seeds of it there, I think, but it just hasn't, that seed hasn't grown to the extent that the military aspect has grown. And you would expect that. Like if you're thinking about, controlled disclosure versus catastrophic disclosure, when does that archetype, the warrior archetype, ever act with the level of control and discernment and so on that you might expect for controlled disclosure? It never does. The fog of war is too hard to see through and make sense of. So ultimately, they just, as I've said, as I used before, the sort of imagery of let's just jump out of the trenches and run at the machine guns, even though it makes absolutely no sense to do it, and we're just going to get blown to pieces. Of course, it's going to go down that path. Of course, it's going to go down the catastrophic disclosure path. I can't imagine that archetype doing anything else. We just have to, I think, perhaps hope that the people that are embodying those other components of the psyche for the greater whole step up and respond to the work of Diana Pasulka, for example, eventually, that more religious scholars, for example, go, I think Jeffrey Kripal is onto something. And if that can start to make movements, then we might hope to see catastrophic disclosure moved back onto a more sensible pathway. Controlled disclosure either. But why are you controlling? You don't need to control my exposure to reality. What you need to do is to provide me with the tools to be able to understand what's going on. I would like understood disclosure, not controlled disclosure or catastrophic disclosure. Why not understood disclosure? And that I'm positive that I'm not the only person that might be thinking this way about these things, that there are other people that have done a lot of thinking in this area that know more broadly how to conceptualize and understand what's going on, whether that's in certain mystery schools or things like that. Maybe they need to step up, or maybe they'll think, well, this is just a cycle, and we just sit back and we just watch things happen. And but it is my hope that the greater wisdom from those other areas might come out and say to the people running at the machine guns, hold on a second. I know you think you're really big and brave and you're the ones that know what's going on, but we've got something to say as well. And I think that would start to bring more sense into the discussion. And I just hope that that happens within our lifetimes, because if it doesn't, I am really kind of worried for the direction that things would go, because there's only really one outcome of extroverting that warrior archetype.
Which we've lived, I believe, just over and over and over and over again. Like we know where that road goes. And
Yeah.
the story that I'm telling about this time that I'm, my kind of reality that I'm projecting out, that I'm incarnate in, is that we have a chance to do it differently this time, and that we actually do. That rather than destroying ourselves completely and things going down to rubble and having to start over, we've had great falls in humanity. And rather than doing that, that we have an opportunity to do it differently. And, as you're talking, and this is kind of I haven't heard this concept articulated exactly, although it's sort of been in my mind. So as you're talking about it, I'm kind of thinking real time about it. And I'm thinking, of the kind of stages and perspectives of going through an initiation on a personal level. And that there is evolution that happens. Like, of course there is. Even, it starts off the destruction that I caused in times in my life when I was less conscious or less, where I was extroverting, as you say, extroverting all these things was, terrible. It was messy and it was destructive. And so seeing, I think you said that you were kind of given this picture of that you sort of signed up for this perhaps. And even life review, a lot of this sounds like similar things that happen in a near death experience, of course. But similarly, I have a sensation that there was always a part of me that was sort of witnessing my life and developed to a certain level and not necessarily embodied or running the show. And I really witnessed myself go through some tremendous darkness and cause a lot of pain and a lot of pain for myself and pain for other people. And as time has gone on, I feel like I chose that path on some level so that I could see all of it. So I could empathize with people or resonate with people at any part and any stage of this seeming initiation and evolution with compassion, like with total compassion and love, because I myself had to come to find compassion for myself for those things that I went through. So as I'm thinking about all of this, I'm also thinking about the people who, these human beings who are finding themselves playing, like you say, playing this role, these archetypes, and seeing their personal evolution as well. And maybe the warriors themselves will evolve into whatever is the next iteration of that, like a warrior of love, or introverting that more and going through a transformation process, because we see that with experiencers everywhere, and the military industrial complex is no different. So I'm positive that there are people in that landscape that are having extraordinary experiences transform them, and that's really interesting as well. I just feel layers upon layers of kind of awareness and places to peek into in terms of how all of this is unfolding. And I also have a question around, you mentioned several times talking about fear and coming to a point where you're sort of indestructible. And the framework that I use for that is, die before you die. And many of these experiences of leaving our bodies or experiences where our consciousness is in a different location, even if for me, it wasn't like I ever overtly had the thought like, oh, since my consciousness is somewhere else, that must mean that it survives death. And that must mean that death is safe. Like I never exactly put that together, but I had so many experiences that I ultimately categorized as death practice. And, I have come to this place that I feel much more indestructible, and like my body will feel fear. And I really respect that. But there's a part of me that trusts that death is safe. And it has given me tremendous courage to carry out my mission, which I was given. And it sounds similarly like you were given kind of marching orders as well, or some kind of mission. And so I just want to see, ask, like, does that resonate? Is there anything that you want to talk about in terms of what your kind of mission is? And then also just give you space to bring forth anything else that you want to share or talk about.
Sure, yeah. I mean, again, when I think about fear as and how it plays its role, when you start to feel that sense of fear, I usually say to myself, okay, well, why am I feeling this fear? It's because this is how I rationalize it. It's because there's a part of me that now needs to die. So, of course, fear is going to come into me. And so I need to think about what things are happening in my life that are signaling to me the aspect of my psychology that I need to work on. Because when you work on your psychology, this sort of positive disintegration that goes on with experiences moving towards, a fully integrated sort of person. A fear comes into your life, and you have those synchronicities if you're looking for them, and you'll find a new place that still needs developing to some extent, and then you do become a new person. So a part of you does have to die, and fear is a natural process of that, and being able to embrace the fear rather than build a wall to shut it behind is, it seems to me, is like that's key to not just spiritual development, but it's key to how people develop in all sorts of different ways. I mean, everybody has fear before they have to study for the, organic chemistry exam or something like that, right? Am I going to do well, or am I going to fail? Or, you know, all of these sorts of journey sort of archetypes and themes that we're discussing, they they happen at a macro level, they happen at an individual level, they happen at micro levels within your life on a daily basis. In each moment, I kind of think this idea of initiation that we're sort of touching on, and I think personally think it's most well synthesized in Matthew Roberts' book. It is happening at all of those different levels. And the more that you can become sensitive to that and understand that that's a part of the process, and actually it's something to be celebrated when that fear comes up, because it means that your subconscious is giving you a chance to evolve. So don't shy away. Embrace it as best you can, and look for the opportunity. And when you're an experiencer, you're at a place where your perception and your psychological development usually has reached a place where, because we're part of the universe, right? We're not separate from it. That's another thing that people need to understand. Don't individuate yourself to the extent that you feel completely disconnected from everything. But at the end of the day, I think there's actually a really positive and amazing story to be told. But, just like you have to be the observer, I guess, you have to reach a point where you're the observer in this meat body, realizing that you're not just this body, right? We have to kind of be the observer as well in the greater humanity. Perhaps that's what experiences are in a way. We're here, I suppose, to tell our stories and to try and provide that kind of guidance, I would suspect. But whether the ears are there to hear those tales and understand what they mean is going to be the big question, because it doesn't come without sacrifice, and it doesn't come without work. And I hear that in every experience's story, the way that they've overcome big challenges. I always hear it in you when you talk, or when J. Christopher King talks, or Matthew Roberts talks. I hear a certain wisdom there that has been achieved through great effort and sacrifice at a personal level. And so my hint to people would be, if you see somebody in the experiencer space and you don't detect that within the way they talk, ask yourself why that is, and whether they're really what they're making themselves out to be. Because every experiencer that I come across has that aspect to themselves.
I love that. Yeah, that's brilliant. I feel so connected and grounded with this conversation and really grateful. There's something so incredibly nourishing about listening to people who have gone on this journey. And it helps me to orient too, because even through, all the really bizarre things that have happened through November and December, and of course, January, the longest month ever in the United States, I got knocked off my square a couple times, like in early December when all the drones and the orbs and, the flurry and all this stuff happening on social media. And I really felt myself wobble. I had to stop and come back to my center and come back and listen to the people that I really trust. And there's a big openness at the center of this, which is quite mysterious. And that's become my ground. My ground is like, we are in relationship with something, and it sort of defies collapse. It defies collapsing the narrative. And there's something really important about that. And if I can continue to keep myself in that space, then it feels like I have a thread to follow as we go through these really extraordinary times. So, yeah, thank you so much. Thank you so much for sharing your story and for coming on the podcast.
Thank you. It's great to talk to you, Robin.
Thank you so much to Brendon for this beautiful sharing, and thank you to Morgan Jenks for our musical soundscapes. Also, thank you to my friend and coach, Diederik Reikens. Dee is a transformational coach, human design expert, and former recruiter who empowers members of his soul tribe to step into the next stage of their personal and professional evolution. And I am experiencing that with Dee. I have really undergone a lot of transformation and change in just a few short months. It has all felt very gentle and accessible. And I feel like I'm making small changes that are having really, really big impacts. I cannot recommend him highly enough. He offers one-on-one longer-term coaching containers, which is what I'm doing with him, that are designed for intentional and organic transformation. You can contact him by visiting his website, codedtothrive.com, or by exploring his YouTube channel, The Projector Project. And of course, all of that will be in the show notes. And stay tuned for information about new cohorts and courses that are coming soon, including a workshop with guest teachers focusing on human design, and another in the works around physical and emotional and subtle bodies and how to work with them. I am so on fire about expanding the network of teachers that can serve this beautiful community. I think that as we face, God, I don't even know whatever this time is, whatever this experience is, the horrors, let's call it, like as we face the horrors, truly, the suffering that we're all being shown and that's rising up from our collective unconscious, all this shadow material that's rising up, that has real impact on real people's lives, and wonder what to do about it, like how to make it through. I think that community is going to become more and more and more important. And so one of my big goals for 2025 is to continue to develop spaces where community can thrive, and we can develop real relationships and real relationality and trust each other and help each other. I don't know what it's going to look like yet, but that is a big call for me for 2025 as we move into Pluto and Aquarius for the next good while, right? That, the power structures that have been in place for a really long time are coming to a close. And how will we make this transition with as much love and compassion as possible? And I think it's through trusted friends. So I'm building community. That's my jam. And I'm going through my own internal deconstruction and reconstruction process around that. I'm also developing foundational courses in preparation for the 3 teachings. And these were teachings that are given to me by these mysterious beings that seem to be in my life and communicating with me. And these are the body teachings, the honeycomb matrix, and the golden frequency. And all of that is coming soon. To sign up to be on the waiting list for all of these things, or if you'd like to connect with me one-on-one or learn anything else about my work and offerings, please visit robinlassiter.com.